A fruit seller humiliates the Keanu Reeves unaware who he is. What happened next? Where are you watching this video from? Please comment and let us know. Also, don't forget to like the video and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The morning sun streamed down onto a lively street market, the air alive with the mingling scents of ripe mangoes, fresh herbs, and sizzling street food. Vendors shouted out their daily specials, and bargain hunters haggled over prices. The place was a symphony of chaos, loud, bustling, and unapologetically alive. In the midst of it all, a man in a simple hoodie, sunglasses, and faded jeans strolled quietly through the crowd. He moved unnoticed, his hands tucked into his pockets, as he glanced at the colorful displays of fruits and vegetables. This man was Keanu Reeves, though no one in the busy market had recognized him yet. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or assistants. No cameras trailed him. Today, he was just another face in the crowd. Keanu stopped at a modest fruit stand, drawn by the bright red apples stacked in neat pyramids. The vendor, a wiry man in his late 50s with a sharp tongue and a keen eye for customers, was juggling orders from 3 different people at once. Keanu waited patiently, standing slightly off to the side, holding a basket. When the crowd thinned, he stepped forward and pointed at the apples. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly. "Can I get 3 of those apples, please?" The fruit seller barely glanced at him before turning back to his work. He barked out prices to another customer, his hands moving quickly to weigh bananas on an old-fashioned scale. Keanu waited a moment longer, then gently repeated, "Just 3 apples, if that's okay." The vendor sighed loudly, his irritation plain. Without even looking at Keanu, he snapped, "If you're not buying a lot, don't waste my time. Go to the supermarket." A few nearby shoppers turned their heads at the sharp comment, chuckling quietly at Keanu's expense. The fruit seller waved him off dismissively and turned his attention to a woman ordering several kilos of oranges. Keanu, ever calm, didn't argue. He simply stepped back, a faint smile on his face, and waited once more, letting the woman finish her purchase. But even as he stood there, unnoticed and unbothered, the tension of the moment hung in the air. Keanu remained calm, his expression unchanged as he stood there. His voice was gentle and steady when he asked again, "I'd just like 3 apples, please." The fruit seller turned to him with an exasperated sigh. He gestured at the apples with a half-hearted wave. 3? Seriously, what am I supposed to do with customers like you? Just 3 apples. Why don't you go to the supermarket? They sell this kind of stuff by the piece. But not everyone in the market was oblivious. A young man in his early 20s, wearing a backpack and holding a bag of oranges, had been watching the scene unfold from a short distance. At first, he didn't believe his eyes. Could it really be him, the guy in the hoodie, who looked so calm even as he was dismissed, so harshly it had to be? The young man adjusted his backpack nervously, trying to get a better look without being obvious. He wasn't entirely sure, but there was something about the man's quiet presence that felt unmistakable. He stepped closer to the fruit stand, his heart racing. Finally, unable to hold back, he leaned over and spoke to the fruit seller in a low voice, though his tone was filled with urgency. "Do you even know who that man is?" he asked, nodding toward Keanu. The fruit seller glanced briefly at Keanu, then shrugged, dismissing the question with a wave of his hand. "What? Him? Just some regular guy," he said, scoffing. "Doesn't look like much. Wasting my time for 3 apples." The young man's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's Keanu Reeves," he whispered, his voice brimming with awe. The fruit seller frowned, clearly not recognizing the name. "Keanu who? Never heard of him." The young man leaned in closer, his excitement barely contained now. "Keanu Reeves, the actor, John Wick, The Matrix. He's one of the most famous people in the world and one of the nicest, too." The fruit seller paused for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You're kidding, right?" he muttered, glancing again at Keanu. "He doesn't look like any actor I've seen. They're all flashy, with bodyguards and stuff. This guy's just ... here, in a hoodie, buying 3 apples." But the whispers had already begun to ripple through the market. The young fan couldn't keep it to himself, and he told a couple standing nearby, who then nudged someone else. "That's Keanu Reeves," they murmured, their eyes darting toward the quiet man near the fruit stand. "You know, the guy from John Wick and The Matrix." The news spread like wildfire, the hum of recognition growing louder with every second. People began turning their heads, their curious eyes locking onto Keanu. Some whispered to each other, while others fumbled for their phones to snap a quick photo or Google his name to confirm it. It really is him, someone said, their voice filled with excitement. What's he doing here, though? Just walking around like a regular person. The fruit seller, now fully aware that something unusual was happening, squinted at Keanu, trying to reconcile the idea of a Hollywood star with the humble man standing before him. Doubt flickered in his eyes as he began to realize he might have made a mistake. But Keanu remained still, unfazed by the attention growing around him. If anything, he seemed almost amused by it, the faintest trace of a smile playing on his lips. There was a time in his life when Keanu didn't even have the luxury of worrying about a few apples. He could vividly recall the nights spent sleeping on park benches, his jacket pulled tight around him to ward off the cold. Back then, every day was a battle to simply make it through. He worked odd jobs to scrape together money for meals, never knowing where life would take him next. There were days he sat on those benches, watching people hurry past him without a second glance. Days where he felt invisible, just another face in a crowd. And then, there was the heartbreak, the devastating losses that still echoed in his heart. He thought of his close friend River Phoenix, whose tragic passing had left a void in his life. He thought of his daughter, lost before she could take her first breath, and the grief that followed. He thought of Jennifer, the love of his life, whose death left a wound time that could never fully heal. Life had been unkind to him in ways that fame and fortune could never compensate for. But despite it all, Keanu never grew bitter or hardened. If anything, the pain had taught him to appreciate life's small joys and to treat others with compassion, because everyone, in some way or another, was carrying their own burdens. Even after achieving global stardom, Keanu had never let the glamour of Hollywood get to his head. He didn't flaunt his wealth or use his fame as a shield from the world. He rode the subway like anyone else, tipped generously, and treated everyone from directors to janitors with the same respect. For Keanu, kindness wasn't just a choice, it was a way of life. The flashback dissolved, bringing him back to the present moment in the busy market. The fruit seller's harsh words might have hurt someone else, but to Keanu, they were just words. He had weathered storms far greater than this, and he knew the importance of not letting anger or pride dictate his actions. As he watched the crowd, his gaze softened. He saw families haggling for better deals, children tugging at their parents' sleeves for a treat, and vendors calling out their prices with smiles on their faces. It reminded him of why he loved places like this, so full of life, so raw and real. Keanu had been through worse, a narrator's voice might have said in that moment, and a few harsh words wouldn't break him, because in the end, Keanu Reeves wasn't defined by his wealth or fame, but by the resilience and humility that had carried him through life's hardest trials. And that same quiet strength now guided him as he waited, unbothered, to make a simple purchase. As Keanu stood to the side, scanning the other stands in the market with a quiet patience, life carried on around him. The fruit seller barked out prices, weighed bunches of bananas, and handed over change to customers. To him, Keanu was already forgotten, a nobody who didn't deserve his attention. The fruit seller rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, suddenly unsure of himself. He began to replay their earlier interaction in his mind, realizing how dismissive he had been. The words "not worth my time" echoed back at him like a bad joke. The market buzzed with energy now, people whispering and pointing, some too shy to approach, others clearly debating whether to ask for a photo or an autograph. The fruit seller shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the moment settling over him as he stared at the man he had just brushed off. For the first time in years, the fruit seller found himself at a loss for words. The fruit seller's face grew more uncertain as the crowd around his stall continued to murmur and point. It was clear now that the man in the hoodie, the one he had just dismissed so casually, wasn't just some guy. The realization hit him fully when a middle-aged woman, holding a basket of mangoes, leaned over and whispered urgently, "That's Keanu Reeves, the actor. You know, John Wick, The Matrix. He's a superstar." The words hung in the air like a lightning bolt. The fruit seller blinked, glancing nervously at Keanu, who still stood quietly to the side, seemingly unaffected by the attention gathering around him. Slowly, the pieces started to fall into place, the calm demeanor, the way people were now whispering his name, the awe on their faces. The fruit seller's stomach tightened. Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves, he muttered under his breath. His heart sank as he replayed his earlier behavior. The curt remarks, the dismissive tone, the laughter he had unwittingly encouraged. He wiped his hands on his apron nervously, his eyes darting between Keanu and the growing crowd. Finally, he worked up the courage to approach him. His usual brusqueness was gone, replaced with a hesitant, almost sheepish demeanor. "Yes, sir," the fruit seller stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you." He fumbled with the basket of apples on the counter, quickly picking out the shiniest, freshest ones. "Please, take these apples, no charge. It's the least I can do." Keanu turned his head slightly, his expression warm but unreadable. He looked at the fruit seller, his sunglasses masking his eyes, and for a moment, there was silence. The fruit seller's hands trembled as he held out the apples, his earlier arrogance now replaced by an almost desperate attempt to make amends. "You don't have to do that," Keanu said softly, his voice calm and measured. He stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on the edge of the counter. "I wasn't upset. I just wanted to buy some apples." The fruit seller shook his head, his voice hurried and almost pleading. No, please. I didn't mean what I said before. I didn't know it was you." If I had known, he stopped himself, realizing how shallow that sounded. "I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I shouldn't have been rude to anyone. I'm really sorry." Keanu's faint smile whitened just a bit, and he nodded, acknowledging the man's apology. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp bill, and gently placed it on the counter. "I'll pay for the apples. Just treat the next person with the same kindness you're showing me now. Deal?" The fruit seller stared at the bill for a moment, his throat dry. He nodded quickly, unable to find the words to respond. "Why, yes, of course. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Keanu picked up the apples, slipping them into his basket as the murmurs around him grew louder. Some people clapped softly, appreciating his grace and humility, while others just watched, struck by the scene unfolding before them. The fruit seller stood frozen, holding the bill in his hand, as Keanu turned and began to walk away, blending effortlessly back into the lively market. The crowd parted for him like water, some waving or smiling as he passed. Keanu acknowledged them with small nods and polite smiles, but kept moving. Just another man in the crowd, at least on the surface. The fruit seller, still clutching the bill, exhaled deeply. His chest felt heavy, but it wasn't just embarrassment, it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. For the first time in years, he realized how much his behavior toward others truly mattered. Keanu adjusted the apples in his basket, but as he glanced at the bustling fruit stand and the other shoppers, he seemed to have an idea. He turned back to the fruit seller, who was still standing there, frozen in a mix of shock and guilt, clutching the bill Keanu had placed on the counter. With his signature calm demeanor, Keanu spoke, his voice gentle but deliberate. "Actually," he said, "I'll take a bit more than just the apples. Let's add some bananas, some oranges, and maybe a few mangoes too." He gestured at the vibrant display of fruits piled high on the stand. The fruit seller snapped out of his stupor, nodding quickly. "Oh, of course, sir. Right away." His hands worked faster than they had all day, carefully picking the best fruits and packing them into bags. He kept glancing at Keanu as if he couldn't believe this was really happening. As the fruit seller finished loading the bags, Keanu pulled out his wallet once again. Instead of paying the exact amount, he handed over double the price, setting the money firmly on the counter. "This should cover it," he said with a small smile. Before the seller could protest, Keanu added quietly, "Treat everyone kindly. You never know their story." The fruit seller stared at him, speechless, the weight of those words sinking in. He realized in that moment how deeply unfair he had been earlier, not just to Keanu, but probably to countless others, who didn't look like they belonged or seemed like important customers. And with that, without waiting for a response, Keanu turned and walked away. The sounds of the market seemed to grow quieter as he melted into the crowd, his figure becoming just another face in the sea of people. The fruit seller stood motionless, his mind racing to process everything that had just happened. For a long moment, the fruit seller was frozen, staring after Keanu, unable to shake the impact of his words. The market around him continued its rhythm, the chatter of vendors, the rustling of bags, the sounds of life moving on. But for the fruit seller, time had slowed. The words hung in the air like a distant echo. It wasn't about who someone was, it was about how you treat them. The weight of his earlier behavior, how he had so easily judged someone based on nothing more than appearances, settled deep within him. He had thought of Keanu as just another customer, nothing special. But now, looking back on everything, he realized that his treatment of others had always been based on assumptions, on quick judgments that could so easily be wrong. He'd assumed that a man in a hoodie didn't have the right to be treated with respect. He had been so quick to dismiss someone, not realizing that the person in front of him could be a total stranger or, as it turned out, a person who had seen and experienced so much more in life than he could ever imagine. And yet, Keanu didn't just stand there and let the world turn against him. He had extended grace to the fruit seller and the others around him, teaching them that the simplest acts of kindness were often the most powerful. A wave of humility washed over the fruit seller as he looked at the empty spot on the counter where the apples had been. He smiled softly to himself, the sting of regret slowly melting into something else, a quiet sense of understanding. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the market as the evening settled in. The fruit seller moved behind his stall, his hands no longer just reaching for produce, but offering something far more valuable: respect. In the days that followed, a quiet change swept over the fruit seller. At first, it was small, like the way he looked people in the eye when they approached his stand, or how he took the time to ask how their day was going. It wasn't forced, it wasn't calculated, it was simply the result of a shift in his heart. One afternoon, an elderly woman with a cane approached his stall, looking at the apples with a slight frown. She seemed hesitant, unsure if she could carry a basket back to her nearby apartment. The fruit seller, who once would have rushed to complete the transaction quickly, stopped what he was doing. Noticing the concern in her eyes, he smiled gently, picked up the basket, and offered to carry it for her. "Don't worry, I'll walk you home," he said, his voice warm. The woman's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with gratitude. "Thank you, son," she said softly, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her cane. It's rare to find such kindness these days. Over the following weeks, the fruit seller's demeanor became the talk of the market. People began to notice that his once stern, quick-witted manner had been replaced with a patience and care that seemed to radiate from him. He didn't just sell fruit anymore. He took time to listen to his customers, ask them about their day, and offer help when they needed it. One afternoon, a young father came to buy fruit for his family, but his card didn't work. Without hesitation, the fruit seller waved it off. "Don't worry about it," he said with a smile. "Consider it for me today. Take care of your family." The young father looked at him, astonished. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," the fruit seller replied, his voice filled with sincerity. "Just be kind to the next person you meet." The ripple of kindness continued to spread throughout the market. The fruit seller's small gestures of empathy and warmth began to affect those around him, creating a quiet but powerful change in the atmosphere of the whole place. People started treating each other with more patience and consideration. The once busy, noisy stand became a symbol of respect, where every person, no matter their background or status, was treated with kindness. As the fruit seller makes his way through another busy day, helping another customer with a smile, the scene slowly fades into the next part of the story. Respect costs nothing, but its impact can change lives. The voiceover begins, its tone thoughtful and soft. Keanu Reeves didn't need recognition to inspire kindness, he did it simply by being himself. The camera shifts away from the market, moving through the streets of the city as the sun sets. Keanu walks down a busy sidewalk, his hood still pulled low, blending into the crowd, unnoticed by most. He walks past busy commuters, children playing, and people going about their day, just another face in the crowd. But there's something different about him. There's a quiet energy, a ripple of goodness that follows him. Even if no one around him fully realizes it, he carries the weight of his actions with a humility that makes him almost invisible. Yet his presence is felt by those who take a moment to see beyond the surface. Keanu pauses at an intersection, waiting for the light to change. A woman with a stroller struggles to navigate a curb. Keanu, without hesitation, walks over, offers a hand, and helps her lift the stroller smoothly onto the sidewalk. She smiles at him, surprised but grateful, and he simply nods before continuing on his way. As the light changes, Keanu vanishes into the crowd, a quiet force of good in the world. A reminder that kindness isn't about grand gestures, it's about being present, being humble, and offering respect to everyone you meet, no matter who they are. Back at the fruit stand, the sun now fully set, the fruit seller stood still for a moment, watching the people around him, the hum of life continuing on in the market. He had learned, through the smallest of interactions, that kindness didn't just change the day, it changed lives. It was never about fame or recognition. It was about the simple act of treating people with dignity and respect. And as he locked up his stand for the night, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a quiet happiness that came from knowing he had found something truly valuable. The power of kindness. It's not about who someone is, it's about how you treat them, Keanu had said. And with that, the fruit seller understood that this simple truth would stay with him for the rest of his life, shaping the way he lived, worked, and interacted with the world.